Welcome back. Now let's talk about charts and tables. So we talked about KPIs in great detail. We've talked about groups and having a hierarchy, both a static or a dynamic hierarchy. Now let's talk about the two remaining tabs here in the designer, charts and tables. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these because there's a lot of them and there's a lot to them, but all the patterns I've described so far still hold true. So let's talk about just a few concepts of them. First, each chart type has its own section. Okay, so if I want to do a bar chart, then when I click on that, you'll see there's 8 bar charts. It didn't do anything yet because I haven't opened any. It just put me on bar charts. If I go ahead and say open, and by choosing this section, I'm going to choose to open all of them. That's going to open the 8 bar charts that exist. Now you're going to see 2 different ways to do a bar chart, and this, for the most part, holds true across all of our chart types. You give it a name, you give it a description, all the other things, you give it a group name if you want, or custom attributes, your choice, just like all the other objects. Then you can choose the label for XY axis, and then here are the 2 different ways you can get one. So you can get a bar chart that's based on a SQL query from a SQL data source. So here's your connect string to the database, and here's the query that you want to run to do that. Now let's go over to the user experience here. Let's click on charts, and let's find this bar chart called lean data. Okay, so you can see it's been defined where month and hours is our X and Y axis, and then it's gathering all this data from a SQL query. Okay, and then you can do some advanced options. What type of format do you want? Do you want it clustered or stacked? Do you want it horizontal or vertical? Do you want it a particular sort order on it, ascending or descending? And then that's one way to do it. And then ignore everything over to the right because you've done it based on a query. And that's going to determine which bars show up and how they show up. The second way that you can do a bar chart is without a connection to an individual data source for the entire bar chart, but by defining each bar individually. Then you go through the same options over here, but then you get to define every single bar. So here's one. It says, get this first one, this tag from this data source, and I want that bar to be this particular color, and I want it to have this much of an offset, and I want it to be named this. And then bar 2, and so on. You just go through each one of these bars in your bar chart. Now this one is called the month, week, day bar chart. Let's go take a look at it so you can see. In this case, every single bar was defined individually, and I have a really cool chart here that shows me how's my performance over the last few days, and before that, the last few weeks, and before that, the last few months. So in one visualization, I can see my more defined performance that's nearer to now, but as I go back in time, I go into bigger chunks because each bar is going to be defined a little bit differently. Each one of those bars can come from a different data source. It can involve calculations. It can involve all those functions that I showed you and talked about with KPIs. All those things are possible. Okay, so those are some of the options. And then as I go over here, once I get past all the bars that can exist, and you can see I can have a lot of bars, up to 20. Then I can have a target line on my bar. I can have a target color and name. I can decide whether to show it or not. I can do conditional coloring, so if it's below or above the target, whether it's going to change color, each individual bar. And then come on over here and even determine the particular lines that are going to exist on the bar. After that, starting here with column ES in this case, I have all those custom attributes. Same thing if I want to define that this is part of plant name equals exton or as part of the geothermal group or whatever I choose can be in there. User experience, again, the same thing. A chart can have a geolocation on it. It can determine whether to show or hide it. You can determine to do that based on an interface. You can set up a time for this. So what's the chart time if you have one? And then you have the extended column as well and parameters, just like all of the other chart types. So that should give you a sense for what a bar chart looks like and how to define one. Again, two different ways, either through a query from any SQL data source. I believe you can do that with JSON as well, or you can define each bar individually. And again, lots of different options: vertical, horizontal, stacked, clustered, you name it. So that's one example. Let me just show you a couple of other interesting ones. Pareto charts, very similar. Let's open that up. Pareto chart is a very valuable chart type that we see in a lot of really interesting applications. In fact, we don't see people use it enough. And you have the same basic options. Let's take a look at one on the end result here. I even have one on my dashboard here. Here's a Pareto chart that shows me the distribution of all my problems, or my downtime in this case, based on which category. And I can see way more. In fact, 61% of all my downtime is related to safety incidents. So I know exactly who's my worst performing category in this case. Very important and very useful chart there. Again, I can get this through a query, or I can define each bar and a few options on it. So a lot of these chart types are going to work the same. I won't go through all of them. You're going to kind of see the same pattern over and over again. There's one that's quite unique, though, and that's embedded content. So let's open up all the embedded content ones. And embedded content is the way that you can take any web-based content and embed it right inside Visual KPI. Now, the example I always show when I'm giving a demo of our software is right here in the user experience, right in the dashboard. Here is a YouTube video, for example. And here's a web form right off of our website for just contacting or collecting email addresses, things like that. So those are two very rudimentary examples of doing that. But it's not just for dashboards. Because when you make an embedded content object, it's still going to have things like, what group do I belong to, or what custom attributes do I have, so that as I navigate through the hierarchy, at each level of the hierarchy, I could have a different set of embedded content. So I might have a process graphic from an HMI screen or something like that, and I might have one for every single one of my units. And every time I drill down to that unit, I have an embedded chart there that shows something that even Visual KPI doesn't support natively, which is totally custom graphics and dynamic graphics. So a very powerful thing, and really all you need at its basic level is to give it a name, give it a home or some attributes, depending on if you're static or dynamic, and give it a URL. So that's the basic way. So that YouTube video that you're seeing running over there in the background, is really this particular one right here, and it just has a YouTube link in it and says go ahead and loop that once, right? Now I can also do some advanced things on this chart, and again you'll see this pattern create. I could say go get that URL from an interface. Let's say the URL changes throughout the day, or let's say I'm looking at security camera feeds and I want to change which one I'm looking at based on where there's activity or based on some other condition. Well, then I can go fetch the URL if that URL is stored in a data source somewhere based on some condition. Could also pass to the URL a start time and an end time if I wanted from an interface. And that assumes that your URL or wherever your web-based content is can accept a start time and an end time and provide you back the information for just that start and end time. But it's possible to push that start and end time over to the system. So you can also control a few other things here, and then you have all the normal stuff. Custom attributes, whether you want to show or hide, latitude and longitude, the extended column, links, everything like that. Just like any other object, okay? But this is embedding other people's content in the system, okay? So very powerful additional chart type there. I'm not going to go through any more charts. Let's talk about tables real quick, but you'll also see a very repeating pattern here. So in this case, tables, unlike some of the other content you'll see, let me put this guy back so it's not distracting. Just like some of the other content, like the bar chart and the Pareto chart and everything, this one is actually defined by a query each time. So in this case, I have a connect string for an individual table. I have a query here that is what do I want to get and how do I want to display it and how do I want it paginated and all those other things. Once I get past the basic query, let me make this a little wider so you can see what I'm doing. Then I have query delimiters, some other advanced things, start and end time as well, chart time, time zones. You know, most of this is you don't need to touch unless you want to do something custom. Once you get past those table-specific things, you have your custom attributes, just like any object in our system. Some user experience things, which this says some functions around that. You can have latitude and longitude, whether to show or hide it, all the extended functionality as well, parameters, you name it. Okay, so tables work just the same as any other object in our system. Now, tables can also contain a lot of things that really come from your data source. So let me show you that. If I go over to tables here, if I look at this maintenance log table, you'll see it's just text, okay? And has a little bit of color in one of the columns. And if I look at this long table here, this has a whole bunch of pagination. So this has tons of records in it. And I could filter it and do other things and search it, you name it, but that all happens from the client, not something you have to configure in the designer. And lastly is you can accept cells from your query that contain HTML formatting. So in this case, there's icons and color, and you can have links and other things in each one of these cells if your data source supports it. So that's a little bit about tables. So that shows you a whole bunch of those objects. And now let's take another break, and we'll come back and just talk about a few advanced or fun settings and then wrap up our training. So thanks for sticking with us. On to the next one.